Does anyone have any worries or concerns about performing these? One thing that comes to mind is that some competitors put some capabilities behind, an Uber premium plan that you have to like schedule time with a salesperson to get access to. I would only ask that you try to get started and you try to find a reasonable workaround, and then if you're hitting a wall, at least document the nature of the wall you're hitting in the KR issue. So
I've brought it up with you before. The one thing that I find challenging is there's no other real value stream management platform like GitLab. Typically, value stream management is done by integrating a bunch of different tools together. So it's almost comparing apples and oranges a little bit at the time. But I'm sure we can figure out aspects of it that are comparable, at least.
Excel.
Yeah.
we're all just competing with spreadsheets, aren't we? All SaaS companies.
Yeah, Mike, you and I talked about this in our one-on-one, but like my main concern was running into issues where I can't fully test functionality without having to connect to like a real project that I can get valuable data from. So I think we talked about some workarounds, or just trying to like connect to like the demo site or something, or other projects that are in GitLab. But we'll just see. You won't know until you try and get in there and look at a competitor tool and you're like, oh, yeah, I hit a wall in this product because I had to integrate with this part in GitLab and I was not about to create 100 MRs to make metrics populate here.
I believe, Daniel, when you were doing category maturity scorecard validation for Access, did you work with the demo team to give you an instance that had a lot of seed data?
Yeah, so they had a kind of setup environment. I don't know how much is relevant for compliance, so it would be worth checking with them just to say, hey, I have this problem. Can y'all help me take a look at it?
And as I recall, they were very responsive to you, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. That's one avenue, the demo team. Do you have a name? A place to start?
They have a Slack group. The particular person I had spoken with, I have forgotten at this point in time. If you just go to hashtag demo-systems, I'll copy the link, perhaps. Maybe. I don't know how. Copy link. Okay, I'll do that. Jeff Martin, I think, was the person I was speaking with. Put it in the agenda also.
Cool. Thanks for the resource.
Let's move on to Austin, number 2.
Yeah. So we've been hearing a lot of great excitement from our customers that are evaluating Ultimate as an option for themselves now that we released pipeline compliance. But that's now making me a little more anxious to get out and like resolve all the smaller usability problems that occur around the user journey. And I'll share my screen to help illustrate where one of these kind of shows up. The basic premise of pipeline compliance is you can require a job to run, or a series of jobs to run in projects pipelines. So at each stage, you can say you have to run this job every time. You don't get a choice to edit it. It's something that we are saying from an organization perspective is mandatory. The way that that appears in a project is you configure a compliance framework that says, hey, here's the configuration file for that pipeline compliance. And then for each project that has to have that enforced, you apply that compliance framework to it. So in this example, Marcel was bringing up the fact that the compliance framework setting just lives in like the general area and taking up some valuable real estate of that section. So we have a proposal to relocate that somewhere else, probably just for a first release of changing it as its own section. But I'd really like to go think long-term, where we would like to set up more of the compliance settings being dedicated under security and compliance. Secure has already built a number of configuration settings specifically in this area. And what I would love to present to users is, like, before they apply these frameworks to their project, I want to give them a preview of what could impact them. So pipeline compliance is currently the only thing now, but we're considering being able to enforce settings through compliance frameworks. That way, you know, as you're applying this setting, you don't have to memorize what all those impacts might be and be able to pick the right thing. So my question for you all is, how would you consider relaying to a user that applying this framework is going to potentially impact your settings? We may or may not know. We may or may not be able to determine if it's going to or not on like the first release.
I would want to have like an understanding of what might be impacted. So like, yeah, cool, you're giving me the notice, but then I'd want to know what is going to happen. Because just a notice without any sort of context doesn't really help. And then it would be almost prohibitive to install it, because it's like, okay, well, if I don't know what's going to happen, then I'm not going to touch it if everything's working as intended, right?
Right. So in my example here, I was trying to relay that if you apply the SOC2 framework, you're going to have pipeline compliance enabled. You're going to have some settings enforcement enabled. That might look different if you applied the SOX framework or something that you've created, which may not have any requirements at all. It might just be a label for all its intents and purposes today.
I think in the context of like where it says the warning message, applying a compliance framework might impact the configuration of a project. I'm like, okay, and because I didn't understand that pipeline compliance and settings enforcements were the current configuration. So perhaps there might be some way to connect those two logical things. That's kind of what I was thinking.
Okay. Yeah, that's good feedback. Making it clear what exactly is happening.
I agree with Dan. And like in the settings, this is under compliance settings and stuff. I'm just wondering whether there's more of a like a brief blurb that you can have, which gives a similar explanation to what you gave us, the context that you gave us as to like, this is what a compliance framework does, and this is why it's important. And then that should set up the context for the alert saying this could impact settings in one way or another. That compliance enforcement blurb underneath what you have right now, like says it adds compliance stuff next to the project name or whatever, but it doesn't really sort of tell you like specifically how that impacts the way that the project works, if you get my meaning. It sort of tells you what, doesn't really tell you how or why.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's really good feedback. Do you want comments on the Figma, Austin? Or are you taking notes on this?
I was taking it in verbally, so I hadn't even taken any notes yet, but I see Nick is writing down some of his thoughts there too. Yeah, I welcome any comments you want to drop in Figma. I will preface it by saying that this page doesn't necessarily exist today. Secure was implementing these, or working towards implementing these other tabs. So we were talking about, hey, let's consider incorporating compliance as another one of those tabs. And I was kind of working within the design of how they had envisioned a like settings area to, you know, kind of show and behave. So, I mean, I guess it could have been reduced to a much more lower fidelity of, I want to show frameworks and like the preview to changes. And then obviously a description would be more useful for helping lead that information. I think the tricky part is compliance frameworks might not have any impact at all. Like if they don't do any settings enforcement or they don't do any compliance pipeline work, then they are just like a UI badge or a label. So it's it all depends on how they were configured.
One quick question. I don't know whether you're going to have the context to this, just stylistically. Why have we chosen to go with boxes for each of those individual setting areas?
Great question. I don't have an answer to that because I didn't design the screen initially, but
Right.
I did share that with Michael Lee too. I'll show you where this is all coming from. So Secure was working on a bigger overhaul of their settings. And so like this is an example of where that was showing up. And I know Michael Lee was asking about it too. So I tried to share with him. He's asking, why are we sometimes using a box? Like you'll find a box sometimes in settings like for auto DevOps. I know that's one that has it. Sometimes there's just like a gray box around the settings. This might have just been a stylistic choice. I think Andy initially built these designs. I am not particularly tied to any solution at this point for how we display the settings individually, but just know that I don't know why it's there.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. I think we could probably use a Gestalt principle of proximity and grouping to differentiate them rather than having all those boxes and stuff, but that's a personal opinion.
Yeah.
Oh, and one last thing is another thing that could probably help out here is also having a link to the documentation for compliance frameworks as well. And if that gives examples and stuff, that may provide even more context.
Yeah, that's a good point. The other way that the way that these frameworks can be applied is you have to be a group owner to set them up at the group level, and the only people that can apply these at the project level are also group owners. So in theory, for a lot of organizations, that will be the same person, but it is possible that someone could be the group owner that configures them and then gives the task to 1,000 project managers that also hold that group owner role, the task of applying that framework to their projects. So in some cases, people will know what they're getting themselves into. I want to try and prevent the case of making a mistake. So I think it would be useful at least to link to some of the documentation. I've lost track of the doc. Let's see if anybody else has more questions. No other questions, it looks like.
There might be an opportunity to start with less to achieve the outcome that you want. I know this is like a sketch, right? It's kind of.
Yeah, it was like a first pass.
Yeah, think about what you can take away initially.
Austin, can you recap the problem you're trying to solve really quickly, just to make sure I can give you the best feedback?
Sure, Alexis. So if you are applying a compliance framework to your project, today, all you're seeing is a list of them. So you might pick one and apply it and not realize that it's going to impact your project settings. So one way that it can definitely show up today is you can have these enforced jobs show up in your pipeline, but you wouldn't know that. It just is you pick a label, you hit save, or you pick a framework, you hit save changes, and now all of a sudden this thing has appeared. I'm trying to communicate to users that, hey, this could have an impact to you that you don't know because it's not necessarily shown to you before you've done it.
So you're not seeing the framework that it's applying, like how it's impacting your flow, basically.
Right, like today, it's just a drop-down list of all of the compliance frameworks that a group's created. And so from there, the only context you're given is the name of the framework. And I'm trying to at least show, hey, this is going to impact your pipeline compliance. Hey, this might impact your inherited settings. You might want to know that before you hit apply framework because it could disrupt your current workflow.
And those are frameworks that you've already, so it's like, is it overriding them, right?
In this case, so currently what's already been, this is kind of a mixture of what's been released and what we're kind of exploring. Pipeline compliance has been released. So if you have specified for your framework that you want pipeline compliance, then yes, it will override your project's jobs if there's conflict. So like if you have a job at your project level that's not as restrictive as the one that's in the compliance pipeline, pipeline compliance takes precedence.
And for MVC, you're saying that we can't show exactly like what the change is going to be. Like we can't say that before they apply. Is that kind of the issue here?
Yeah, it's hard to know. We only just know like the location of the pipeline compliance. We don't know like all of the ins and outs of that file per se. So I was thinking for MVC at least telling you, hey, there's a potential impact that's more than, hey, there's nothing. Good luck.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. I'll look at the issue. That'll help me.
Yeah, and I'll highlight that the issue is mostly just about relocating the setting. So what we identified as a reasonable iteration away from what we have today is just to move it to its own section, as opposed to having it within the general area. So thinking of a longer term vision, moving it into configuration of security and compliance, and then being able to show more details around it.
I think that makes sense because it's sort of breaking your settings in a way. You want to give it a little more hierarchy, right?
Yeah, and it just, where it currently lives today doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We just had initially launched it assuming that it mattered at the project creation level, but it seems to matter more once projects have been established.
Thanks for talking more about it.
Yeah, thanks for all the great feedback and any future feedback that might be coming my way. I'll pass it on to Mike since Holly's was more just FYI.
Yeah, so I just realized this is probably the first time Libor is hearing this. Did you read the agenda yet?
Your comment right now, Mike?
Yeah.
I'm just reading it right now. No.
Okay. I was watching for a facial expression and I was like, man, this guy's got a poker face. You don't though, you're very expressive. Yeah, this is my last design review. My last day at GitLab is this Friday. And so rather than identify a facilitator for this, I just remind you all to use the agenda and hold each other accountable to making sure that if there's something in the agenda that that item is addressed and it's addressed before the meeting ends, obviously, that everybody gets equal time, and to kind of monitor the monologuing. So I'm not accusing anyone in particular right now of doing, this is a general problem and I have this problem and I'm doing it now. So when you're speaking, so here's a trick I do. I turned on the seconds counter in the top right of my Mac OS clock. And when I'm mindful of it, I'll actually glance and try to be like, have I been talking for more than 60 seconds? And if I have, I'll definitely like pause and definitely ask if everyone's still following along and this is still, beneficial for folks. So just be mindful of that. And I don't think we need a particular facilitator. Just hold each other accountable to being inclusive. And the videos should continue to automatically upload to Google Drive. So yeah, just, maybe once a week, someone says, I'll upload it to Unfiltered or something to that effect. How does that sound? Or do you prefer that someone is a DRI?
Sounds good to me.
We just put it at the top of every agenda.
Yeah, what should we
Don't
put at the
forget.
top? Yeah, don't forget to upload. There is a link to the playlist also at the top of the agenda. Yeah, maybe I'll put a link to Google Drive up there. All right. Any final thoughts before we go?
Feel sad that you're leaving, but best of luck.
Me too. This week is gonna suck. I hate saying goodbye. How about see you later?
That
Yeah, I had no idea, Mike. That sucks. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, I didn't see the agenda item, so.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It'll be there. I think Valerie will broadly announce it tomorrow at the UX Weekly. So yeah.
We'll
Yep.
we'll see you around. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. See you later.
Be on the interwebs.
Small world. So
Yeah.
be good to each other. All right. I'll see you on the flip side.
Bye, everyone.
Yep.